and Bouska Novak. I am representing my four sisters, Sally Bouska McCoy, who lives in Madison, Wisconsin, Peg Bouska, who lives in Iowa City, and Carol Bouska, who lives in Minneapolis. I live north of Seattle, and we together have inherited our 450-acre farm in Northeast Iowa. The partnership began in 2013, but previous to that, Sally's coming in with a slide, if she can. Basically, the property is in Northeast Iowa, Winneshiek County. It's about 450 acres. And my great-grandparents, we're not sure of really specifics, but the property was purchased in about 1903. Again, the farm is 450 acres. It was primarily diverse kind of farm, which is what people are getting back to, with animals. I think they had like at least 3 crops. My dad talks about sorghum, which would be kind of a fun thing to grow. I don't know if it's still possible. And so my father inherited the farm and got married and married my mother, who lived there for her whole life, basically from the age of 18. And my parents were interested in biodiversity and conservation. And early together on this diverse family farm, they started CRPs, waterways, and other conservation measures. And that was kind of the beginning of what was in our knowledge base of what is important for farming and for bees, insects, animals, and biodiversity. So how's it going, Sal? There we go. Perfect. So here's the farm. Just like life, everything has its glitches. And this is the property. This is my my aunt, who, as you see, we had a round barn, and apparently we had sheep at that time. But so we grew up in this house, and we still go there to gather together. So it's time to change the slide, please, Sally. Again, those are my sisters. My parents really were into conservation, learning new things. They got involved with Iowa State University when we were young, contributed to the community, were involved in a variety of things. And in 2004, I was just trying to figure out, I think my dad was 86 and my mom would have been 81. They planted with NRCS, they planted this hedgerow or windbreak behind the house. It was 100 arborvitae and also red twig dogwood. And they were very proud of it. Dad watered it the first year, and Mom said, "We didn't lose one tree." So they were very excited about that, Sally. And it was a big effort. This is the 5 of us. My brother Jack lived in Atlanta. None of us live on the farm And nobody has lived on the farm since my parents died. My mom died in 2011. We have a farmer who's farming the property, and we work with him on conservation, especially no-till. This was the first kind of step towards conservation, developing a pollinator fields. And this writing on here is my brother's notes. He was very excited. And so we got started with the pollinator fields, and you'll see later how many acres we have. Unfortunately, this is the spring of 2014, and that September my brother died. You can go ahead, Sally. We, of course, were in a lot of shock and everything, but before he died in 2013, we did a legal partnership, and that was really a great thing because it was set up to go forward. So we sisters worked together and decided to go ahead and further our conservation efforts, even though we lost our brother. So we were inspired by a workshop we went to that had to do with regenerative agriculture. And it seemed like the right thing for all of us. We just all had this kind of organic belief in conservation, biodiversity, improving the soil, water, and air quality, providing safe and healthy foods for people and animals, and contributing to the health of the local community. We really believe that rural communities need a big regeneration as well. We also wanted to stop the tide of land consolidation and keep family harmony. So working together has been a huge goal. And as I indicated, none of us live on the farm, and we live in different states. So working together has been a challenge. And some people know us for talking about legacy issues. So basically, this was a big decision to go ahead and focus on regenerative ag, and with the help of Eco Design, which is a women's development farm ecological systems approach. We decided to go by 2030 into a more regenerative approach. Next slide. So to date, since 2019, the fall of 2019, October, we have completed 20 acres of pollinator fields, 37 prairie strips, 6 acres of restored wetland, which is down there. The wetland is an area on the farm in the corner, which was highly erodible. And the farmer was always kind of like, well, I don't, he didn't really care about it because it was probably more work than benefit. And that is adjacent now to prairie strips and pollinator fields. So there's that continuity. We also did a windbreak of 9 acres, which Sally will tell us more about. 8 acres of waterways, 220 acres in cover crops, which is going to increase, and no-till from 2013, I believe, and alfalfa in a rotation. Next slide. So that work has been, as you can imagine, when we don't live in the same place and we're working on a property that we don't live on, it's been a lot of focus and effort. So I guess the question would be, and we're kind of focusing, of course, on agroforestry, bees and insects and butterflies and all kinds of wildlife below and above the ground. Why are perennials so important? For one thing, they build a healthy soil. They develop deep roots to retain water, control erosion, and filter nitrates. And of course, they reduce fuel and chemical inputs particularly through nitration. They support wildlife diversity and plant diversity, which they go together, wildlife diversity and plant diversity. They create corridors for wildlife. We have the whole property of the home farm in some form of conservation. And the windbreaks filter toxic drift. So you can see above the pre-prairie strips and then the post-prairie strips. So it also helps with cover crops it helps people to get into the field, a farmer to get into the field earlier because it's not as wet. And of course, the prairie strips are going to be left as the pollinator fields. And we will continue in that effort, looking at grazing as our next focus. Sally?
So I'm Sally, excuse me, and I apologize for the glitch. I was bounced off the internet for some reason. So for this presentation, we're going to talk mostly about the Windbreak Project, which we started in 2021. We had a lot of help with this, and as Anne mentioned, Ecological Design, a woman-led company which helps develop farm designs, put out a transition plan, which was a 10-year plan to get us to being a regenerative farm by 2023. You can see the transition plan in the right-hand corner there. So they were the original planners, and it was additionally supported by the Iowa DNR. The plant sources came from the DNR and our local supplier, and the labor was from the local landscaper. You can see him in the lower right-hand corner putting in the bare root plants, which were just these little sticks that didn't look like much. And when we show you some pictures later on, it's really amazing how well they've done. Our funding was from the FSA cost share. We also want to mention historical information, which was helpful to our planning. This was a farm that was entirely tiled, and we had the tile maps that our dad had kept. So we were able to look where the tile lines were. We found that the tile lines went into some of the areas that the windbreak was supposed to cover. The original plan was to put a windbreak around the entire perimeter of the farm, but because it was tiled in those areas, that would have been a mistake because the tree roots could have gone into the tile lines and disrupted the water flow. So the tile maps helped with that. And we also had the good fortune of knowing the man who put in most of the tile lines. And he, though he was in his late 70s, was happy to come out, and he knew where some of the tile lines went and the couplings went, even though it wasn't necessarily on the maps. So he helped us make some adjustments to where those tile lines were, so we were able to complete a windbreak on a substantial part of the property. We understand that these resources are not available to everybody, but it was really fortuitous that we had those resources. In terms of continued consulting and maintenance, we use the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. You can see Peg in the photo there, getting some information from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, DNR, NRCS, and the local nursery continue to help us. The windbreak project was started in May of 2021. As Ann said, it's 9 acres with 4,500 trees and shrubs. There are 7 rows of plantings. We have legacy trees, which are oaks, hickory, and white pine. The outer row facing the outside of the property is a hybrid poplar. Hybrid poplars grow very fast and filter both air quality and soil from toxins. So that was a really good choice. The fast growing habitat is cedar. And then we have 9 species of fruit and of shrubs, which provide fruit, flowers, and habitat for pollinators. On the bottom there, you can see the bare roots. There was a label for bur oak. And the right-hand picture shows some of the family members mulching all of the 600 legacy trees. There were some significant challenges, and I'm going to talk about the challenges first before going to the successes. 2021 was very droughty, and so there were challenges planting and putting up tree protectors, cages for tree protectors. The nursery, of course, had their plant heavy equipment, so they could dig the rows and put in the trees. But we wanted to put in protectors so that there would be less animal damage to the young trees. We were advised to put a tree protector on every 4th tree, and there were 600 of the legacy trees, so that meant about 150 cages. To put steel posts, which we had on the farm from Dad's previous projects, into the ground, it was so hard to dig. We couldn't do this by hand. So we had to rent this 2-handled gas-powered auger that you see in the picture there. Very heavy-duty equipment that really needed this younger member of the family to do it because it was really hard to do. I wanted to mention that because with increasing drought conditions, if people are planning on digging, planting trees, or putting in protectors, you really need to think about, can you dig those holes by hand? I will also mention that as you see her with the auger, behind her is already a row of trees that have been planted, and you can barely see them because they've just been planted. There were challenges during COVID getting supplies of the wire to go around the trees, the tree protectors. Local resources didn't have them, so we had to bring them from 2 different states when we traveled to get them. So just another complication. Challenges in maintenance and labor. Mowing between the tree rows was necessary the first year and has continued to be necessary since then, just to maintain, keep down weeds. The first year, we don't have a mower, so that's done by a local nursery, the people who put in the trees. Their watering that first year was also done by them. We don't have a tanker, so we had to contract out those jobs. We definitely have had problem weeds, especially thistle. In the picture of me looking at the oak, the lower part of that picture is all thistle. And we've actually cut these by hand with hand tools or weed whackers. It has been a continued problem. Tent worms have been a problem too. We had an infestation last year. They feed on small plums and just can eat a whole tree down. We have 100 plums, so we walked the rows and just pulled the webs and the worms off of each plant that was infested. Some of the white pines did not survive, so we had to replant whole rows of that. In terms of lessons learned, this was kind of a hard lesson. The windbreak plan was to use ground cover to plant between the rows. So you can see on the top picture, that's all stubble, and it had to be planted with ground cover to protect it. The recommendation was clover and fescue, which we did on those fields. But there was another field that was still in alfalfa. And we thought, why kill the alfalfa and plant something else? Just keep the alfalfa, which was a very good weed barrier, but it also competed with the trees. So that was something we probably wouldn't do again. Despite those challenges, there really were some wonderful successes. The native shrubs are really thriving. You can see the bottom there. This was 2023, June. It just really beautiful flowers there. Habitat, that is a shrub that has a nest for a red-winged blackbird. They're planting in the trees rather than on the ground because of how much more protection they have. The poplars are thriving. Poplars grow between 3 and 8 feet a year and are doing very well. And the oaks and hickory have about a 70% survival rate. You can see there an oak tree that's taller than 5 feet, and the poplars are between 15 and 20 feet, depending upon the tree. So they've done just very, very well. Briefly, the pollinator fields and prairie strips, the 57 acres, we have a great diversity of forbs and grasses that have survived and done very well. It's provided a 4-season habitat for birds, animals, and insects for them to overwinter, protection from predators, and year-round food sources. This has provided a corridor around the entire farm, and that is well established. It goes from the trees to the prairie to the wetland. So there's this very protected area for habitat for wildlife. Speaking about the impact on pollinators, birds, and humans, we are seeing and hearing migratory birds and birds that we haven't seen that were residents on the farm years and years ago, like bobolink and meadowlark, that are probably encouraged by having the wetland there, but also where there's an increased insect population because of all of the habitat for them. We have a verified, identified presence of the American bumblebee. The Iowa State University had a research study that they asked us to participate in, and they verified the American bumblebee. It is an area that the rusty patch bumblebee, an endangered species, also has. We haven't particularly verified the presence of the rusty patch, but if it wants to be there, it has habitat. We've also noticed that we have increased interactions with nature and the land by the entire family. Because we're walking out to look at the wetland, the trees, and the pollinator fields, we're noticing things more. You can see that the youngest generation is looking for tadpoles in that picture. The young boy there, he and his family were walking out to the wetland and saw this hedgerow of black raspberries, which they were delighted to pick. This past Labor Day, we had a very hot and windy day. We were out looking at the wetland, and when we returned, we were nearby the hedgerow of arborvitae that Anne showed you that the folks planted in 2004. When we walked by, we saw hundreds of monarchs lifting up as we walked by. They were probably sheltering in the hedgerow, that cool arborvitae, protecting them from the wind and from the heat. It was really a magical experience. And so, despite all of the work, this has really been a joyful experience for us. I'm going to turn you back over to Anne.
Yes. And again, my four sisters and their families are working on this together. And we've seen a lot of interest in the community and what's going on. They'll say, "Hey, what are you guys doing there?" Not really, but the neighbors kind of ask about stuff. They want their kids to go and check out the wetlands. We've had a worker who's done the excavation of the pond drive by with his kids and comment to them about the hedgerow or windbreak. And we've seen visible changes that people have said, wow, we really like what you're doing, even extended family from other states. We have collaborated with Luther College, which is about 25 minutes away in Decorah. And we've had 3 different groups of students participate in being on the property through Luther College or Zoom meetings. We have had the study from Iowa State University, and that was initiated through U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which has been a fantastic resource. We've had a field day with Practical Farmers of Iowa and Climate Land Leaders. We are members of both organizations, and we've employed a lot of local farm businesses to support the community, and both for implementation and maintenance, excuse me. We try very hard as part of Regen to support the community because we believe it's integral. Integral. I guess that's a word. Sally, is there one more slide? There we go. So this is, what happened when my dad and mother started their windbreak. And it's over on the right. You can see how it's quite small, and now it's really amazing and filled in. And we are always learning, trying to improve conservation and contribute to the community. So thank you.
Great. Thank you both, Anne and Sally. I am going to turn it over to our colleague, Grace Yee and Brad Woodson, who are going to speak for the rest of it. Thank you both.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to thank Anne and Sally. That was a great presentation. It's very inspiring to see what you guys have done with your property and your whole family. So thanks for sharing that. And thanks for sharing your presentation. It was excellent. So yeah, we kind of got thrown into this, but we're really happy to be here. So we're going to kind of use some different resources that are available to everybody and talk about tree planting and maintenance and some of the benefits of trees on your farm. So let's go to that Iowa State one real quick if we can. But the one with the forestry. So one word that kind of, well, you said a lot of things that really touched a point with me, but one of them is legacy. So when you get into tree planting projects, there's definitely a legacy that goes along with it. So I've done several of these throughout my career, and it's hard to believe, but you might be doing something that's going to last 200 years, 250 years. You know, we think about annual crops a lot in Iowa, but when you're planting even a shelter belt or a tree restoration project, it could last several hundred years. So it's kind of hard to think about that, how long term some of these tree projects are, but they can certainly last that long. And actually, it's true with prairies as well. So prairies and certainly prairie remnants are going to be there, and they can last a long time. So one of the things we want to start with, and this is Grace, I'm Brad Woodson, so we're both the Practical Farmers of Iowa, and we're in the Habitat Viability department. And so hopefully there's some time, and then we'll talk about the projects and the programs that we have. But we work on prairie strips, we work on precision conservation, we have pollinator habitat grants. So we have a lot of different things to put habitat on the ground. But I guess I wanted to start with selection of species. And Iowa State has a terrific, I think this is Iowa State or Iowa State Extension. And my first thing is, and I think it showed on Ann and Sally's farm, is native species. So whenever you have a chance to plant native species, that's the way to go. And there's a whole bunch to choose from shrubs to trees, tall trees, shorter trees. And many of these are excellent for wildlife. And again, they're gonna grow and last a long, long time. So the big key is actually matching the tree species with what's on site. So you want to look at soil type and hydrology. And can you actually share that screen too? Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so basically you can go through and look at the different species, whether it happens to be an evergreen species or a deciduous tree or even shrubs, but look at again, if it's like moist soil or dry soil. And then if it's going to be, you might be planting in an area that could be in the shade. So you might have an oak savanna and you want to plant some shrubs in there. So those are all types of things to consider, is again, the soil type, the shade, and the hydrology. And there is excellent resources that are available, but then there's also the DNR foresters or private foresters or arborists that you can contact. Even Iowa State Extension can help in that process. So again, there's lots of resources. The other thing is you have to decide, and can you go to that shelter belt? Is a lot of times you can do single species in rows, or when some of the projects I've been involved in, it's actually really interesting because you always know when you see a tree plantation, it's always in rows. But I've been involved in some projects where it's actually, the trees are kind of randomly spaced and it's multiple or mixed species. So again, if there's a disease that comes in, hopefully that breaks up that disease cycle, so it just can't spread through and wipe out a whole row. So we've seen that with green ash. Unfortunately, some of our oaks are succumbing to disease. So that's one thing that I would try to do for sure. And I think that's what Ann and Sally did, is they plant multiple species of oaks and hickories and different things. So that's what I would recommend too, different species, a diversity of plants. And then if it can work out, not necessarily in rows, it is easier to, maintain and water plants when they're in rows, but it looks more natural when trees are not in rows.
Yeah, and I just want to quick mention that I'll drop all of these resources in the chat so you guys can have access to it. And also, you can see here, there's like good, better, best, and it tells you kind of number of rows. And I think earlier, Anne, you mentioned you guys have 7 rows, which I was like, I turned to Brett, I'm like, oh my gosh, 7 rows. That's really awesome. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. No, that's great. So let's move to kind of tree planting. And it was great about what you guys talked about is there's different methods. So you can, if it's a smaller project, you can use a hand spade and put them in. You can auger them in, and that's great. You always want to go a little bit bigger than where those roots are going to go, so the roots can easily expand into the loosened soil. There's tree planters as well. So there's a lot of different methods, and each method has its own benefits and maybe drawbacks. Some are longer, some are quicker. But so once the tree's planted, and then it's that maintenance. So having either a ground mat, or some people will herbicide and try to reduce the competition from weeds and from grasses. So a lot of times people would put mulch down, or they'll put cardboard around the tree and then mulch on top of that. So again, you're trying to keep that moisture in the ground, and you're trying to reduce the weed competition. So the other thing that can happen too is I think you guys mentioned caging, and you cage for livestock, and you certainly cage for deer too. So deer can have a huge impact on your newly planted trees and shrubs. The other thing is with tree shelters. I was involved in some work, and we're actually looking at the tree mortality. So I think you guys said you lost only 30% or 25 to 30% of your trees. But what can happen too is mice and voles will actually girdle and chew that bark around the tree. So that's another reason why you have the tree shelter. It kind of creates a microclimate, but then it also protects those young trees when they're very susceptible from mice and voles girdling around and eating that bark around, which will kill the tree. So those are some minor things, but they can but when you start looking at how much it took to plant the trees, and that maintenance part is a big part of it. So irrigation is another one. So hopefully you have a nice wet year, and those trees and those roots get established, and they can grow. But that's another part that should be factored in, is once the tree's planted, some kind of shelter or caging, and then watering, maintaining from a weed standpoint, and probably watering a couple times, throughout several times throughout the growing season, just to make sure those trees have a chance to get really well established.
And I just want to mention that, well, I guess I'm curious, Anne and Sally, like whether you guys received any assistance, like cost share, to put in those like tree tubes, or mulching or irrigation. Okay, so the reason why I asked that is there are cost shares available for that through NRCS office. There are some state cost share available too. So in order to be eligible for those, you would have to be part of the USDA farm program. A really easy way to find out whether or not you are in the program is to see whether you have farm and track numbers. And if not, you can easily sign up by going to your local USDA service center. Every county in Iowa has one, and you need to have owned the land for at least a year to do that. And through a program called EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, there is tree planting resources that will cover some of the costs of like site preparation, buying the trees to plant, and then doing like buying tree tube shelters. Sometimes they'll even cover the cost of, not all of it, but some costs of like irrigation side of things. So those are some resources I can also drop in the chat.
Sally, do you want to respond to that? I
I
could.
think we did get some money for the wire, and that we put around there, as well as our labor. We were paid for some of our labor. I can't remember the specifics of it, but we did get some funding for that.
Okay, good. Yeah.
We're using as much as we can in terms of the funding that's available. We're really on it, but there's always new things. I didn't know you could get help with mulch. I'm not sure that we did that, but yeah.
Sure. It
Yeah.
was a family project, so that labor was not quite so. When we had lots of bodies, it helped a bit more.
Yeah.
That's the way to do these things. Lots of bodies, lots of hands. That's for sure. Yeah. So I probably should mention this now is like Grace and I are actually actively seeking some grants to help from PFI's perspective for PFI to help provide some cost share for tree planting. We don't have it yet, but there are other, just like Grace mentioned, there are other avenues out there. So hopefully we'll have some grants that will help out with tree planting because it's such a great practice. And that's where I was going to kind of just roll into. I know, Ben, you wanted to leave some time for questions, so we'll wrap this up quickly, but just wanted to speak about some of the benefits. And Ann and Sally talked really, in depth about the benefits, and there are many. So kind of some of the things I jotted down are, of course, there's wildlife benefits, there's pollinator benefits, there's agroforestry. So that's kind of a newer concept of using trees, as it could be from fruits and mast, could be for shade and pasture situations for cattle and livestock. It's windbreaks, not only windbreaks for livestock, but actually windbreaks for the farmstead. There's lumber and firewood. I mean, so there's a whole bunch of different fantastic benefits from tree planting and things like that. But I also wanted to mention I was at the Prairie Conference this year and talking to the state botanist, and one of the things that we should never forget about is not only tree planting but also managing and taking care of the existing woodlands. So there's a lot of areas out there that are already in tree cover, and they might have invasive species in there. They might have just been kind of neglected. So managing those areas and taking stock of what's already on the landscape and then building around there. So planting trees around those existing woodlots is just a great practice. And then, like you mentioned too, creating a corridor, connecting those habitats. And that's not only good for wildlife, it's also good for pollinators and for plant species to spread throughout those corridors. So there's a lot of things that can be done. And yeah, we just want to see everybody, protect as much of our natural landscape as possible. So do you have anything else to add to that, Grace?
So I do want to do a little promotion of PFI's habitat incentives program. So we do have some that lines up really well with what we talked about today. So I'll share my screen here, but this is our habitat incentives program webpage. And here you could see we have these practices that that are ongoing right now. Anne and Sally, you guys mentioned a lot of prairie strips. So that is a program that we have right now. Through PFI, you can either sign up on your own, like on our program, and that will be 5 years, or you can also sign up in CRP and then get like one-time incentive payment through us. And then we also have pollinator habitat, which is designed for the northeast quadrant of the state, but it's a little bit different than traditionally what people think of northeast. So it's basically east of 35 and north of I-80. So all these counties in the state are eligible in the orange boundary. And it's a really, really high diverse, high quality mix that will have blooming all 3 seasons, lots of milkweed species targeted for threatened or endangered species like American bumblebees you guys mentioned that you found on your farm, rusty patch bumblebee monarchs, and regal fritillary. So we also help with that with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I saw some pictures of Greg, our partner staff who works with us on that. And then we have the precision conservation analysis.
He's a pretty good guy.
Yeah, we love Greg and our Fish and Wildlife Service staff. The precision conservation analysis is for anyone who are thinking about who has row crop acres. And what we'll do is we work with Pheasants Forever to figure out areas that are low yielding and you're actually losing money by putting inputs and time and labor into those acres. And so if you decide to take those acres out and then put, trees or pollinator habitat like Anne and Sally did, then we will actually pay you on the rest of the acres that you continue to farm. It's like one-time incentive payment to help make that transition a little bit easier. And then on the areas that you are transitioning, then you can take advantage of other cost share, whether through us or through like NRCS or FSA like Ann and Sally did, to convert that into habitat. So these are the programs that are active and available through PFI right now. And with that, well, I think we can move on to questions.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ann and Sally and Brad and Grace, especially on such short notice. Really appreciate you two jumping in here. I am going to go ahead and get some questions out. We have one kind of from the beginning of the presentation. I have to go back up to get it. This is for Sally and Ann. What inspired your sisters and you to transition the farm to using more regenerative practices?
Sally?
Well, we went in 2018, we all went to a conference together and to learn more about farming practices, and attended a workshop by Ecological Design where they talked about regenerative practices. And that was so compelling to us that we felt like that fit with what we thought our mission would be. So that's why we hired them to do this plan for us, which is moving us in that direction. It really fit with what our goals were emerging at the time.
We also met with a consultant who helped us work on our direction. So that was kind of more for the emotional and how are we going to do this together issue, which was a day long commitment.
All right, thank you. I'm not really sure if this is directed towards Ann and Sally or Brad and Grace, but I think it's Ann and Sally. Are you planning on doing any maintenance burning of your prairies anytime soon?
We do that on the basis of what is required or what is recommended. So that's something that's always done. We have found that it's challenging to find people to do it because it's, you have to be well trained in making sure it doesn't get carried away and the timing and all that. But Peg is kind of in charge of keeping track of that. And we've done it many times. I don't know, Sally, is it every 4 years or I can't quote.
Like
Yeah. Yep, we do
it's
that.
usually mid-contract.
Okay, thank you. So while we're going on here, if you do have questions, you can type them in the chat. The next two are also for Ann and Sally. How are you planning for the longer term future, and will the next generations continue to be part of the farm?
Sally, I'm going to leave that one to you.
Good question. That is an ongoing process, and we're planning for that all the time. Part of our planning is to get people out there into the fields and becoming as invested in the projects as we are. It's hard because we grew up on the farm and this next generation didn't, so they don't have the background that we do. One of the things I did want to say about being out in the field, one of the boys said to his younger brother when we were mulching, Neil, these trees are going to be here for 200 or 300 years, a lot longer than we're alive. And it was that when you said that before, I thought, yep, that's true. In terms of legacy, one of the things that we're trying to do to help the next generation, if they elect to take on the task, is that we meet every 2 weeks online to do our work together, the four of us, and we have an agenda. We keep minutes and we keep track of our voting records. And all of those documents are kept in a Google Doc so that people can trace, all of our work together. So if it isn't the next generation and it's another farmer, that documentation would be available to them.
Yes, and we do not anticipate any of the next generation farming. But that is an ongoing challenging issue, and we work on it all the time. Thank you.
Great. Got one more first, Ann and Sally, and then we'll have one for Brad and Grace. But Ann and Sally, you mentioned that you had 9 shrubs in a planting. What were those species? And I know you mentioned fruit, but were there any fruit or nut-bearing shrubs?
Well, of course, red twig dogwood. Did you get the list, Sally?
I got the list. It is 3 species of dogwood: plum, wild plum, hazelnut, elderberry, 9-bark, cranberry, and nannyberry.
And one of the things that I understand NRCS requires is that they be different seasons of blooming and fruiting. So that gives your wildlife continuity. I wanted to say that we also have a 5-acre woodlot,
All right,
and we have had that
thank you.
assessed, and we're continuing to try and figure out how to use that and improve it.
Brad, any- All right. I think we have time for one more. So this is to Brad and Grace. What kind of participation are you seeing with the Precision Conservation Program?
Yeah, so we have seen some. It's difficult, and actually, I ended up writing a 3-part blog about it, and it's on PFI's website just because it is difficult, and it's a little bit to explain. But basically, as Grace mentioned, farmers now have yield monitors, which actually show these areas that are not profitable or they're unproductive. It could be too wet, it could be too dry, it could be eroded soils, it could be a lot of different things. So it's identifying those areas and literally, a farmer taking a loss and kind of averaging out the whole field. It's identifying these areas and then putting them in cover. So we are seeing some. I actually signed up some of our farmland for it. And so instead of losing money on those acres, we're getting quail safe CRP and a switchgrass RCPP and making money on it and having water infiltration, having habitat on the ground. So yeah, it should be more, there should be more people signing up. But as Ann and Sally mentioned, the problem is with some of this is now you have to maintain it. Now you have to manage it. Now you have to burn it. So I think that there's all these little things that you have to do. You have to sign up for it. You have to identify it, and then you have to maintain it. So if a farmer or landowner is willing to do those things, it's just a fantastic program. So one thing that I know Grace and I have talked about is trying to find more contractors out there to help plant the prairie, trying to, to maintain it. That is a limiting factor, is having somebody to come out and burn it, but you don't have to necessarily burn it. You can use mowing or there's other techniques to do that mid-contract management. So yeah, we're trying to find ways to make, put more habitat on the ground and to farm, smarter and better. And not degrade some areas that probably shouldn't be farmed because, again, they're highly erodible.
And I'm also going to drop a blog post that Brad wrote about his precision conservation analysis experience. And also to answer Gil's question, you can copy and paste these links, but also Vanya is gonna pull together all the links and can send it out later.
All right. Sure, we can do this one last one, but I'm not sure who it's really directed to. Is there any partnership with, I guess this is the University of Northern Iowa, Tallgrass Prairie Center? I don't know if that's directed to PFI or to you, Ann and Sally?
I have reached out to them because I went to UNI, but distance is kind of an issue. And I don't really know. We use PFI a lot because they have a lot of financial and knowledge benefits. So I would say we haven't really connected with them. I had connected with um, the college in Fayette. What's it called? Anyway, one of the biology teachers there. So if you have any suggestions on that, please let us know.
Answer the one.
Yeah, so for the UNI Tallgrass Prairie Center, right now we don't have a formal partnership, but we certainly have relationship with them, learn from them. They do a lot more of a research and they provide information, but I don't believe they have like an active cost share going on. I know they do have some funds for people who are interested in doing like a demonstration site. So if that's something you're interested, you could reach out to UNI Tallgrass Prairie Center.
Yeah. One other thing I'll mention is they do have some excellent resources for prairie seed nurseries and even contractors. So they have a great website, a lot of information about planting and harvesting and everything prairie, but also contractors and resources that are available throughout Iowa.
Yeah, and they have a lot of articles. I found an article that said ditches do filtration. And I was like, oh, well, good.
And they're part of the roadside management program, and so they're the ones that are promoting roadsides and prairie and roadsides. So yeah, they have a lot going on there.
All right. Well, I want to thank Ann and Sally for their time today and for their great presentation. And I'd also like to thank Brad and Grace again for the last minute drop in. Really appreciate that. For everyone else, thank you for attending today, and we hope to see you again next week, same time on Tuesday at noon. So everyone have a great day, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.